What are the odds that one man could survive the most destructive weapon ever used in human history, not once, but twice, in the same week, in two different cities? The mathematicians who have tried to calculate it give up. The physicists who designed the bombs said it was essentially impossible, and yet it happened. To one man, a Japanese engineer named Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who woke up on August 6, 1945, in Hiroshima, survived a nuclear detonation, bandaged his wounds, got on a train, went home to Nagasaki, and then watched the sky turn white again. This is not a story about luck. This is a story about what the human body, the human mind, and the human will can survive when survival itself seems like a cosmic joke, and by the end of it, you will never complain about a bad week again. But before we get to the bombs, you need to understand who Tsutomu Yamaguchi was, because this story only makes sense when you understand that he wasn't a soldier, wasn't a spy, wasn't someone trained to survive impossible situations. He was an engineer, a quiet, methodical, deeply ordinary man who worked for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, designing oil tankers. In the summer of 1945, he had been sent on a 3-month business trip to Hiroshima to oversee a project. He was 29 years old. He had a wife and an infant son waiting for him at home in Nagasaki. He had done everything right, finished his work ahead of schedule, packed his bags, and on the morning of August 6th, he realized he had forgotten his travel permit at the office and turned back to get it. That forgotten piece of paper is the reason this story exists at all. He was less than 2 miles from the hypocenter when the Enola Gay released Little Boy at 8:15 in the morning. He described what he saw in interviews decades later with the precision of an engineer, even when describing the end of the world. There was a flash, not an explosion first, a flash. A light so intense it felt like the sun had fallen out of the sky and landed in the street. The pressure wave hit him a fraction of a second later and threw him into a potato field. Both his eardrums ruptured. His arms were burned so severely that the skin hung off them in strips. He was temporarily blinded. He lay in that field while the city around him ceased to exist, while the black rain began to fall, while 80,000 people died within the first hours of a single morning. And then, because he was Tsutomu Yamaguchi, he got up. He spent that first night in an air raid shelter. Around him were the survivors of Hiroshima burned, bleeding, in shock, barely recognizable as human beings. He found 2 colleagues from Mitsubishi who had also survived, men named Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato, and the 3 of them moved through the wreckage of the city together. What he described seeing in those hours, the shadows of people burned permanently into stone walls, the rivers clogged with bodies, children wandering alone, calling for parents who no longer existed. He would spend the rest of his long life struggling to find words for, but here is what Yamaguchi did not do. He did not stay. He did not wait for help. He treated his wounds as best he could, and on August 8th, 2 days after the bomb, he boarded a train back to Nagasaki. His colleagues came with him. He was going home. He had no idea he was walking into the second act of the most improbable story in modern history. He arrived in Nagasaki on the evening of August 8th, still bandaged, still partially deaf, his arms still raw and weeping. His wife and son were safe. He went to a doctor who treated his wounds and told him to rest, and on the morning of August 9th, because again, he was a deeply conscientious engineer who took his responsibilities seriously even in physical ruin, Tsutomu Yamaguchi went to work. He reported to the Mitsubishi offices in Nagasaki to file his incident report about what had happened to him in Hiroshima. His supervisor listened to his account and told him flatly that it was impossible. One bomb could not destroy an entire city. No weapon was capable of that. Yamaguchi was standing in his supervisor's office, trying to explain that he had seen it with his own eyes, that a single flash had erased Hiroshima from the map, and at 11:02 in the morning, the sky outside the window turned white again. Fat Man detonated 3.9 kilometers from where Yamaguchi was standing. He was slightly farther from the hypocenter than he had been in Hiroshima, which almost certainly saved his life a second time. The blast blew out the windows of the office. The pressure wave knocked him off his feet. The bandages were torn from his wounds. And Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who had already survived the impossible once, lay on the floor of a Nagasaki office building and survived it again. He later said in interviews that in that moment, with the white flash filling the room, he thought he had gone mad, that his mind had broken and was replaying Hiroshima, that he had lost his grip on reality. It took him several seconds to understand that he was not hallucinating, that it had happened again, that he was, for the second time in 4 days, a survivor of a nuclear attack. The injuries he sustained in Nagasaki compounded what he had already suffered in Hiroshima. His hair fell out. He developed a high fever. He stopped being able to eat. Acute radiation syndrome, what the hibakusha, the bomb survivors, called the disease with no name, moved through his body over the following weeks. His mother, convinced he was already dying, told him to eat whatever he wanted because nothing mattered anymore. He ate. He rested. He did not die. Slowly, week by week, his body pulled itself back from the edge of what should have killed him twice over. By September 1945, he was recovering. By October, against every medical expectation, he was largely functional. His wife and son had survived both bombings without injury. The family was, against all probability, intact. But surviving the bombs was only the beginning of what Yamaguchi had to endure. The decades that followed were in many ways their own kind of war. He suffered from radiation-related health complications for the rest of his life. His hearing, destroyed by the first bomb, never fully recovered. He developed cataracts. He lost a daughter to cancer in 2008, a loss he publicly connected to the radiation both he and his wife had been exposed to. The psychological weight of what he had witnessed, the scale of the destruction, the death of hundreds of thousands of civilians, the burned children in Hiroshima's rivers never left him. He had nightmares for decades. He refused to talk about his experience publicly for years because the Japanese government's treatment of hibakusha, survivors who were often stigmatized, considered contaminated, denied insurance and employment, made disclosure dangerous. The people Japan had failed to protect with its war were then failed again by the peace. He eventually found his voice. In his 60s, 70s, and 80s, Yamaguchi became an increasingly vocal anti-nuclear activist. He gave interviews. He testified. He wrote. He appeared before the United Nations. He wanted the world to understand, not in the abstract but in the visceral, bodily, documented reality of one human being's experience what nuclear weapons actually do to human beings. Not the strategic calculations. Not the geopolitical justifications. Not the clean language of deterrence and megatons. The skin hanging off the arms. The black rain. The rivers. The shadows on the walls. He wanted people to look at him, a man who had absorbed 2 nuclear detonations into his body and walked away, and understand that the only reason he had survived was an accumulation of distances and coincidences so improbable they bordered on the miraculous. In January 2009, the Japanese government officially certified Yamaguchi as a Niyu hibakusha, a double bomb survivor, the only person in history to receive that formal designation. He was 93 years old. He died on January 4, 2010, of stomach cancer. When he died, a category of human experience that had existed for 65 years closed with him. He was not a hero in any conventional sense. He forgot his travel permit and turned back to get it. He was a conscientious engineer who showed up to work even when his arms were bandaged. Every single decision he made was ordinary, and the universe placed him, twice, at the center of the most extraordinary destructive events in human history, and he walked out of both of them. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but alive and determined, for the remaining 6.5 decades of his life, to make that survival mean something. He survived 2 atomic bombs. The least we can do is remember why that should never have been possible in the first place.